tens of thousands of people have joined anti-racism demonstrations across the UK, despite government appeals for protesters to stay at home because of fears of spreading the coronavirus. Many taking to the streets did wear face coverings and gloves. London, Manchester, Cardiff, Leicester and Sheffield were some of the places that saw the Black Lives Matter protests following the killing of George Floyd in the US city of Minneapolis last month. The demonstrations were largely peaceful, but there were some clashes with police outside Downing Street this evening, with mounted officers driving back some protesters along Whitehall. With more, here's Chichi Azundu.
Early evening, after the official end of the protest, police were trying to clear Whitehall. The officer knocked herself off her horse, it bolted into the crowd and trampled a protester. Both are now receiving medical care.
This is exactly what organisers called not to happen. Just at the end of the protest, when the heavens had opened, trouble started.
Despite heavy rain, groups stayed behind, throwing bottles and flares at officers. Other protesters called for calm. Peaceful is what the main event had been. A much larger number had turned up than expected. But this is a movement growing with each protest, not only over the death of African-American George Floyd last month after a white police officer knelt on his neck, but to highlight that the UK is not innocent when it comes to racism.
We are here to unite, because what we are fighting for is to stop institutional racism. Yeah?
The government had appealed for people to stay away.
We are in a health pandemic across the United Kingdom, and coronavirus is a deadly virus. And of course, I'd say to those that want to protest, please don't. The regulations are very clear, you know, in terms of gatherings and mass gatherings in particular. We must put public health first at this particular time.
Organisers handed out masks and gloves and told people to keep 2 meters apart. But as the crowd grew, space diminished.
Us going out, it's just not defying the government. We're still going to be careful, but it's to say that actually this is urgent and this needs an urgent action.
But London isn't the only place taking a peaceful stand. In Belfast, they managed social distancing during their demonstration. In Manchester, an estimated 15,000 people gathered in and around Piccadilly Square.
I'm from America, so this is just a really big deal to see this impacting the world so far from home. It's actually pretty fantastic.
In Sheffield, thousands of protesters took the knee, a peaceful symbolic gesture against racial inequality and police brutality that's fast becoming the emblem of this time. This is one voice with one message. Black Lives Matter. And as thousands gathered in towns and cities around the UK, theirs is a hope that they'll be heard and real change can start. Chichi Azundu, BBC News.
There were scenes of violence in central London today after demonstrators clashed with police in a day of unrest condemned by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. Groups, including some far-right activists, had gathered in the capital, saying they were protecting statues from anti-racism protesters. Violence erupted and officers were attacked with bottles, smoke grenades and flares. 6 police officers were injured and more than 100 people arrested. Well, Boris Johnson described it as racist thuggery and said that individuals attacking the police would be met with the full force of the law. This report from our correspondent Tom Simons does contain some violent scenes from the start.
There had been some peaceful protesting. But it wasn't long before this started. Throughout the day, the police have been repeatedly attacked. These lines of officers were there to keep the protesters apart from an anti-racism demonstration nearby. This team were pushed back from outside Parliament. The crowd broke through. They attacked photographers. We tried to ask some of those protesting why they'd come.
Report the truth. I'm asking to speak to you so I can report what your truth is. It's quite hard for us to ask these protesters what their demands are. We have faced threats today. They are from a variety of backgrounds. There are people from far-right activism here. There are organised football supporters groups. The one thing they say they aren't is racist.
The clearest motivation today, protecting, in the protesters' words, the statues in this area, though Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela and the others had already been covered up. One protester who would talk said he felt Churchill, British history, were under attack.
Come on. I mean, he had some racist views, but at the end of the day, he led us through our darkest hour. I mean, I'm from South London. I've grown up with black people. We're all working class. We live side by side. Nobody here has an issue with BLM.
Some anti-racism protesters also gathered today, but Black Lives Matter held its protest yesterday to avoid trouble, though there were still some scuffles.
We have power to change.
At a BLM event in Newcastle, the organisers said there had been threats.
We've received a lot of opposition and, threats from, far-right groups and whatnot. So we had to keep this quite low-key.
And elsewhere in the city, the tension was clear on the streets, but nothing to compare with London. Including scenes like this, police are investigating. The memorial is to PC Keith Palmer, murdered there in a terror attack in 2017. The Prime Minister tweeted, "Racist thuggery has no place on our streets." He said these marches had been subverted by violence. This from the Home Secretary.
The individuals that are basically putting the safety of our police officers and the safety of the public at risk will expect to face the full force of the law.
It went on and on. Waterloo Station this evening. A massive police operation's been needed to restore order. 100 arrests, another 6 officers injured, protesters too, including this man carried to safety. But an angry day is finally over. Tom Simons, BBC News, Central London.
Well, our political correspondent in Watson, as you can see, joins us now. Tonight, Ian, the Prime Minister making it very clear who he thought was responsible for the violence.
Well, that's right, Kate. As we saw, there were some Black Lives Matter protests in different parts of the country today, but the Prime Minister absolutely crystal clear on who he thought was to blame for the attacks on police here at Westminster. It was this which he denounced as racist thuggery. Now, he has, of course, also criticised those anti-racist protesters who brought down a statue in Bristol. And I think when he says that demonstrations are being hijacked by extremists, he wants to seem to be even-handed in his condemnation. Now, tonight, Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, also said, no ifs, no buts, all attacks on the police are unacceptable. So at that level, there's a political consensus. But I can tell you, Kate, not that far beneath the radar, Conservative MPs in particular are getting restless. Although today's demonstrations weren't huge, nonetheless, they are concerned that government warnings to stay away from unlawful protests are simply being ignored. As one senior Conservative MP put it tonight, it feels like the teacher has left the classroom. So in the next 24 hours, expect to hear from the Home Secretary Priti Patel talking again about the need for swifter justice, talking about the possibility of doubling prison sentences on those convicted of attacking police and other emergency workers. All this to try to demonstrate that the government is getting a grip.
Ian, thank you.
There just seems to be a total lack of comprehension on this panel, and indeed amongst this audience, which is a remarkable audience, even by the left-wing standards of the BBC. I mean, this lot's pretty left-wing.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second.
When you talk about
Nigel, let me
housing,
just say one thing.
Yeah.
This is an audience that has been carefully chosen, not by the BBC, but by an independent polling organisation to represent the balance between all parties. It's
never a great idea.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Anyway, carry on.
I think it's very interesting.
It's never a great idea to
cannot
the audience,
discuss.
Nigel.
You cannot discuss. No, the real audience is sitting at home. Actually, you cannot.